So I hope you can all hear me. My name is Enrico Ronchi, and I want to all welcome you to our 10th event of our webinar series of the Human Behaviour in Fires Permanent Group of the International Association of Fire Safety Science. And I am leading this group together with Dr. Erika Kuligowski from RMIT in Australia. Unfortunately, we had to accommodate many time zones around the world, so we had to pick a time this time that fit more East Coast, US, and North America, and Europe, and part of Asia. So it's middle of the night in Australia, so unfortunately, could not be here. And I also want to acknowledge Arthur Roert from Lund University, who is the PhD student that is helping me in setting up everything for this webinar series. We have a set of ongoing activities in our group, and the webinar series is one of them. The other main activity in which we are engaged is the setup of a research agenda in the field of human behavior in fire. And for those of you that are signed up to the mailing list of the group, you've probably seen that recently we have published our first paper that presents an overview on the field. So to join our group is actually free, and you just sign up and you can remain updated on our activity. I hope Arthur can help me with posting this in the chat.
Yes, I already did so.
Thanks a lot, Arthur, always efficient. So today we have a very nice and interesting presentation with Dr. Hossein Tavanarezaei as a first speaker, who completed his PhD at Ulster University in December 2023, and he focused on microscopic pedestrian movement and crowd dynamics, and received in 2021 a Gullimpru Award, and works now as a fire engineer at IDROC. Then we have Dr. Yunhe Tong, a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Edinburgh, specializing in crowd modeling and emergency behavior. And his research explores how attributes influence individual and crowd behavior through VR, experiments, and computational methods. And then we have Khadija Baig from Carleton University, focusing on privacy and human behavior in emergencies. And she contributed to research on genetic privacy, accessibility, misinformation, and evacuation reporting. So as you know, the event of today is fully dedicated to early career researchers. So I think we should support people that are entering our field and are have the young energy to bring new insights into the field of human behavior in fire. So since we have 3 speakers, the format for today is that we will have about 12 minutes each for each speaker. We will start with Hossein, then Khadija, and then Yunhe. And then we will take questions at the end. So in the meanwhile, during the presentations, you're welcome to write your comments or questions in the chat, and we will then take them at the end. So I now stop my sharing, and I ask our first speaker, who is Hossein, to please share his slides and go ahead with his presentation. And I don't think we can hear you saying yet.
You can't see my screen?
Now we can hear you, yes.
Oh, okay, perfect. Can you see my screen as well?
Not yet. We saw it for a second, but
let me stop sharing and start sharing again. Okay.
It's now loading. Yes, here we are. Please go ahead, Hossein.
But is it in present?
It's all good. It's all good. It's all good.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for your nice introduction, Enrico, and happy International Women's Day. My name is Hossein Tavanarezaei, and in this presentation, I will talk about the new experimental methods and parameters for microscopic models of crowd movement, which is a high overview of my PhD research at Ulster University. I did my bachelor in civil engineering and my master in highway and transportation engineering, and just finished my PhD at Ulster University in fire safety engineering in December 2023. Currently, I work in the fire safety division of Hydrac. When I was a first-year master student, a fire happened in Glasgow, and many people, many firefighters died. And I was thinking of how we can improve the safety in emergencies for all. So I decided to do research in crowd movement field, with the ultimate goal of making the world a safer and more convenient place for all. So we designed a series of experiments with funnel-shaped bottlenecks and narrow bottleneck to see which one is more efficient, and if funnel-shaped bottlenecks are more efficient, which funnel-shaped bottlenecks has the most efficiency. And the speed, trajectories of each person, evacuation time, flow, etc. were extracted, and finally it was understood that funnel-shaped bottlenecks are more efficient than narrow bottlenecks, and the most efficient funnel-shaped bottleneck was found. So from this slide, I will talk about my PhD research. Crowd movement models have many simplifications, use the data usually gathered in the middle of 20th century, and use speed, flow, density relationships that are varied. Indeed, as you can see in this figure that's taken from a study by Hossein et al., you can see speed, flow, speed density relationships are varied from a study to another study, and it is even questioned by their own originators. So we need to use an up-to-date model with up-to-date data to be able to simulate and reproduce the movement of the population of buildings today or in the future, rather than using a constant flow rate for all population and a constant evacuation time for all spaces. The main aim of this study was to leverage experimental data to explore the parameters of the movement of individuals moving in a crowd and their interrelationships to inform the development of a mathematical model of crowd movement. And the objectives were to develop a deep understanding of microscopic movement characteristics of individuals in congested space using interdisciplinary overview, to investigate movement parameters, their interrelationships and influencing factor in single file and wider flow using empirical insights, empirical data to explore the movement parameters of the stop-start walking behavior of individuals using empirical data, and to review and refine the movement adaptation model of pedestrian dynamics. Movement adaptation model was firstly introduced and developed by Dr. Peter Thompson and has the potential to be further developed to reproduce the movement of people with different characteristics and different abilities, like different ages or disabilities, etc. And finally, to summarize the outcomes in a form that may be used to inform mathematical models. In other words, I wanted to inform the development of the movement adaptation model, which considers the physics of individuals and considers the biomechanics of movement rather than speed, flow, density, relationships, or simplifications like forces or discrete space or time. And the objectives were to determine the appropriate parameters and find the differential interrelationships between the parameters. Movement adaptation model considers the maximum occupied space by individuals by considering their steps and the contact distance between themselves. The basic equation of this model is defined thus. In this equation, interperson distance equals to step extent plus contact buffer, which step extent is the maximum back heel to front toe distance of an individual, which is slightly less than the step length plus foot length, and contact buffer is the minimum distance between two consecutive pedestrians, which is the front toe of the person behind the back heel of the person in front. Finally, we can produce the flow rate by dividing speed to inter-person distance, which is the reverse of density in a single file. To confirm the basic equation and further development of the model, a series of experiments were conducted at Lund University, and 59 participants attended that in a single file and wider flow. A circuit was created using chairs, and ropes were used to confine this 4-meter part of the path, and 3 cameras were placed to collect data, one outside the path, one inside the path, and one above. Different starting densities. We had different starting densities to see the effect of the density on different gait characteristics in both single file and wider flow trials. And the participants were instructed to walk as they naturally do, given the number of people around themselves in a single file. And in wider flow, as you can see here, they could walk side by side, but they were not permitted to overtake each other in different trials. Another series of experiments were held at University College Dublin with 16 participants in groups of 4 participants. One researcher walked in front of the group, another person was behind the group to produce the same situation for all in a 14-meter path. 3 Coda motion receivers were set up, and pedestrians participants wore 6 sensors, one on shoulder, on arm, on feet, and leg of participants. And these 3 receivers made us enable to collect the data in 10 meters of the path. And the trials were in an uninterrupted walk and in a walk with a stop in the middle of the path, that I will call it interrupted trials. The reason of having 2 different kind of experiments was to compare collect different methods for collecting data, and to compare different experimental conditions. In UCD, we have density. In Lund, we had density, and in UCD, the speed of people was controlled by the researcher who was in front of the group. Also, to analyze and characterize the interrupted trials, we needed data with a high accuracy. Different analyses were done and different interrelationships were extracted. Here in this slide, you can see 2 of the most important factors: step extent versus speed, and contact buffer versus speed in a single file and in uninterrupted walk in UCD. As you can see, in both trials, step extent increased by increasing speed. However, for a given speed, in lower speeds, you see participants in UCD took greater steps. That was because of the different experimental conditions, where in UCD experiments, pedestrians were under less pressure to go ahead to take a step, and they could stop, have the preferred distance with the person in front, and then they could take their steps. And in Lund University, they had to shuffle forward when they had a small space in front of themselves, as you can see here, because of the nature of the experiment. Also, in the contact buffer versus speed, you can see contact buffer was constant in both scenarios, up to 0.4 meter per second for Lund and up to 0.7 meter per second for UCD, and that it increased linearly by increasing the speed. Again, you can see in Lund we had less contact buffer. Also, it was negative, that is showing the overlap between the front foot of the follower of the person behind the van and back heel of the person in front. All these analyses were done also in wider flow to understand the differences between single file and wider flow, and we found some differences. To find the root of those differences, the participants, the people in trials were separated, were categorized in two groups. One, direct leader and followers of direct leader, where the people didn't have any offset with the person in front, and the followers of an offset leader or offset leaders, where pedestrians had an offset with the person in front, as you can see here. And it was found that the root of these differences is coming from offset leader group. Also, the differences between men and women in rock-hitting crowd were investigated, and it was found that women tended to keep more distance with the person in front by taking less frequent steps but greater steps. However, these differences were not statistically significant. I think the most interesting part of my research was characterizing the stop-start walking behavior or uninterrupted walk. And in this slide, you can see how it happens. The red line is the right foot, the blue line is the left foot, and the green line is the shoulder of participants, and we got data in X, Y, Z, and time in the spreadsheets. To characterize data, first, the trajectories of participants with the heat map of speed was extracted. However, we needed some concepts and some characterization of the stop-start walking behavior to be able to characterize and quantify that. So by using the concepts in transportation engineering, we characterized the stop process to perception reaction time and slowdown time, and the startup to startup time delay. Similar to vehicle traffic theory, perception reaction time was the time taken for an individual to understand the speed changes of the person in front is happening, to perceive that, to understand that, and decide and start reacting. The slowdown time was the time taken from the reaction to the full stop, and startup time delay was the time difference between consecutive pedestrians to start walking again. Using signal processing methods and low-pass Butterworth filter, we filtered the data and used interperson distance and relative interperson speed to be able to analyze this data and characterize stop-start walking process. You see different times here what happened, and here is one sample. Considering both interperson distance and relative interperson speed in a time window before the full stop of both, the leader, the person in front, started reducing their speed, and you see interperson distance is decreasing and also relative interperson speed is decreasing. At the point that the follower, the person behind, started reacting, the relative interperson speed reaches its own minimum, whilst the interperson distance is still decreasing. And at the full stop, interperson distance is almost constant, and also relative interperson speed up and down is because of the natural body movement and natural body sway. In average, perception reaction time was found to be 0.48 seconds, the slowdown time was 0.58 seconds, and the startup time delay was 0.39 seconds. Overall, different relationships between different gait characteristics and distances with speed was found in both single file and wider flow. A novel methodology was developed to characterize stop-start walking behavior, and different components were quantified, and the model was updated based on the result of this study. However, I just presented a high overview of that, and if you are interested in, you can email me and have a discussion on that. And at the end, I would like to acknowledge my supervisory team, Dr. Ken Boyce, Dr. Peter Thompson, and Dr. Dennis McGrath. And also I would like to thank to Dr. Hakan Francis and Professor Daniel Nielsen for sharing their experimental data and for their thoughts in different stages of this work. And this is my email, and looking forward to discussing on this.
Thank you, Hossein, for your interesting presentation. As mentioned, we will take all questions at the end, but in the meanwhile, as mentioned, if anyone has any comments or questions, you can also put them in the chat and I will moderate them in the end. I suggest we go ahead in the meanwhile with the second speaker of today. I think we have Khadija first as second. Oh, Yunhe, you go first? Okay, that's fine. You go first. Please put in presentation mode your presentation.
Yeah.
Yes, and we're all ready. Very good. So the floor is yours, Yunhe.
Okay. Thank you, Enrico. Thank you, everyone. My name is Yunhe Tong. Currently, I'm a postdoc at University Edinburgh, working on using social psychology knowledge to understand pedestrian behavior in evacuations and help evacuation management. It's my pleasure to give a talk today. My topic is how psychological factors shape pedestrian route choice in emergencies instead from empirical investigations. When it comes to the pedestrian route choice, there are two categories of factors that influence human decision making, which have been extensively studied. The first category is individual characteristics, including age, gender, route preference, and the second category is the route attributes, including distance, coordinates, familiarities. Here in this talk, I want to bring your attention that the psychological factors are important as well, which can help us understand human decision making, but also can help create more accurate pedestrian dynamics models, but it has received less attention as it deserves. In this talk, I will use 3 examples to demonstrate the influence of psychological factors on pedestrian route choice. The first example is we call diminishing importance of environmental cues. Previous research have done a lot of work in single route choice where people only need to make one decision. Here, in this scenario, we consider the route choice sequences where people have to make more than one decisions, and we assume that earlier choices can impact subsequent ones. We also found that previous research has established that a larger number and more complex route decisions along a path increases the cognitive load. Also, there's a concept called decision fatigue in psychological research, which refers to the quality of decisions made by individual decreases after a long session involving many decisions. That means the quality of decisions decrease with the increasing quantity of decisions. So based on this fact, we made the following hypothesis. The sensitivity of pedestrians to environmental information diminishes as the number of decisions they have to make consecutively increases. To test our hypothesis, we create a scenario. As shown in this figure, it shows the top view of the building, and here the yellow circle represents the participants, and they don't have any knowledge about the building. They have to rely on the movements of others represented by the red circle to make a decision. And you can see the building, there are lots of junctions. At each junction, we assume the participants have to decide whether to follow the crowd or not. And also, you may notice that the simulated pedestrians will go around the building in a circle. That means if the participants decide to follow the crowd, they won't never get out of the building until they decide to stop following and choose the side route. where they can find the exit. Here is how the environment looks like. This is controlled by the participants, and they can move this character using their keyboard, and they can decide whether to follow the crowd or not. They choose to follow, and we speed up. And if they choose to follow, they just follow the crowd, unless they decide not to follow, and finally they can find the exit. After we conduct the environment, we got the data, we create a mathematical model to incorporate the hypothesis in our model, and we found that the model, considering the diminishing information, can fit the experimental data better than the model without considering the hypothesis, which has supported our hypothesis. Here's the first example. And another example we call increasing adherence to pre-planned route. The scenario here is that we assume people have planned their route, but when they are walking along their planned route, they encounter a congestion, and now they have two options. The first option is to wait and stick their planned route. The other option is to choose the alternative route, and both options will take them the same time to reach their desired destination. We consider two conditions. The first condition, we call it low investment. That means you are just beginning the journey. You haven't made any investment to your planned route. And in contrast, we have condition B called high investment. You have already been working for a while in your planned route. That means you have already investment a lot to your planned route. And our hypothesis is, as pedestrians invest more in a planned route by walking along it, that they tend to adhere to that route increases. And we also can find some relevant theory in psychological research, which called commitment and consistency, which refers to the aligned behavior with core values for internal harmony. It can simplify decision-making process by using past decisions as guides, but it also will lead to negative consequences, such as the plan continuation bias, which means people are more likely to stick to plans despite changing circumstances. For example, pilots may maintain their planned course in accidents even if changing could prevent disasters. So here we made the hypothesis. We test our hypothesis using online survey, and we provide the participants with the condition low investment, where participants just start their journey, and higher investment, where participants have working for a while along their planned route. And we ask them which route to choose. They either can stick to their planned route, or they can choose another route, and both options are equally good. Take the same time for them to reach the destination. Also, we optionally provide the participants with quantitative information. Then here's our results, and we found that participants tend to choose the alternative route rather than the congested planned route. We also found that they are more likely to stick their planned route when they were closer to the destination. Our hypotheses have been supported by the survey data. And the last example is about the response to the movements of the crowd. By reviewing previous research, we found some diverse results on pedestrian whether follow the crowd or not. In some models, we found some research just assume people will follow the crowd. But for some other models, they just assume people try to avoid others when making exit choices, even about the assumption of the consequence of the following the crowd. Researchers have different assumptions. Some people think it will reduce pedestrian evacuation efficiency. Some people think it help optimize the evacuation system. And in contrast, in empirical findings about whether people follow the crowd, people have different assumptions, different findings. And some people found that the direction preferred by majority doesn't have a significant effect. And some others found that people spontaneously tend to follow others. And others found that they are not follow the majority. Instead, they follow the minority. So based on this, we made our hypothesis that how people respond to the movements of crowd depends on the context. And we assume 3 different contextual factors. The first one, we call it spatial information to indicate whether we provide with spatial information. The second one, we call crowd state. It shows the congestion level or simulate pedestrian around the exit. You can see the figure. If the crowd state is busy, that means the crowd will obstruct the participants. That means the participants have to wait if they want to go through the exit. And another we call free. That means there are only a few people around the exit, and the participants can move through the crowd freely. And the second one we call crowd split, which shows the distribution of the individual crowd exit, and even distribution, and 0 to 1 split. 0 to 1 split refer to all the people will choose the same exit. And here is an example how we conduct the experiment. And here's the training session. They have to familiarize themselves with how to control the movements of the character, and provide them with a map. And they will observe the movements of others and decide which exit to take. And the results, we found that pedestrians have an innate tendency to avoid the crowd, and with spatial information is available, it influences more than the crowd. And also we found that pedestrians avoid an absolutely empty exit, even if it otherwise has desirable properties. Now let me make a summary. I use 3 examples to demonstrate how psychological factors influence pedestrian decision-making in evacuations, diminishing reliance on environmental cue, and the increased adherence to pre-planned route. Also, varied rebound to the others' movements. Here I want to summarize the highlights. The first one is psychological factors significance in pedestrian behavior. And also we found the small but detectable effect size in specific scenarios. And I want to bring attention again, understand the influence of psychological factors cannot just what, but why people behave in certain ways. Thank you. I will answer questions at the end.
Thanks, Yunhe, for your nice presentation. As mentioned earlier, if you have questions, we will take them at the end and you can write them in the chat. So it's now time for Khadija to present her work. So Khadija, can you please share your screen?
Yes. Before I go ahead and do that, can you hear me okay?
Yes, very well.
Perfect. Okay, excellent. Let's see here. Is it up? Looks good?
Yes, all good.
Okay,
Please go ahead.
Excellent. Well, hi, everybody. Today, I'll be talking about my research on the design, development, and evaluation of an evacuation reporting template. This research was conducted with the National Research Council of Canada as part of an internship through Carleton University, Ottawa. Egress drills, as we know them, are pre-planned reenactments of evacuations. Most obviously used for legal reasons, data gathered during drills can also be used for training, research, and performance assessment purposes. Unfortunately, this data collection is often inconsistent or incomplete. For example, while some reports might contain detailed observations, others might simply state that a drill has occurred. This limits how useful this data actually is. To this end, we argue that one barrier to effective drill recording is the lack of a standardized reporting template. Such a template would provide consistency, facilitate effective comparisons across different events, and provide a systematic means to comprehensive data collection. To address this, we developed an evacuation reporting template for large multi-site organizations. This was done over several iterations. I'm going to briefly walk us through this process. First, we conducted a literature review to understand the qualities of a good evacuation report. We used the results of this review and an existing form from our organization as a starting point to draft a new template. Next, we used a survey to elicit feedback on our forum from 30 fire safety experts and users. This was implementation test 1. We used the feedback to revise the form and then conducted a second implementation test with 11 experts and users. After the second test, we finalized the form, creating our final template. The final template was then adapted by a major organization. After it was used in practice, we conducted 3 follow-up interviews with safety officers who had either already used the template or were going to do so for additional insights. In our research, we found that good evacuation reporting forms are usable, covering general usability attributes like how easy it is to complete and how long it takes to do so. Request relevant information only, the necessary details of the incident being reported, and request information that is accessible to the person filling out the form. We use these metrics for our initial design and to evaluate the form through our surveys and our interviews. Now, let's start with what's essential to query for during an evacuation. We identified 5 categories of key incident requirements. First, we have base conditions. These are just the circumstances under which the evacuation occurred, like the date, the time, the weather. Next, we have building information. So the descriptions of a building's physical characteristics, like how many occupants it can hold or its egress attributes. Next, we have the context or scenario under which the evacuation was initiated, like whether it was planned or unplanned, for example. Performance also should be measured. This includes numeric metrics like evacuation time or qualitative information like occupant and personnel behavior. Finally, we have reflection. This involves subjective qualitative observations by individuals involved in the evacuation, which may provide critical insights. Now that we've covered key incident data requirements, I'll touch briefly upon usability. Usability was divided into 2 sections. First, we had the usability of the form itself. This was a paper form that we were designing, so we had to be careful with designing the structure, making sure there wasn't too much content on a page, margins, font size, all those sort of details. Next, we had to consider the usability of the items on the form or the form fields. They needed to be easy and ideally quick to complete, with language that was clear and minimal room for misunderstanding. We created a preliminary template that met the key information and usability requirements, and then conducted 2 surveys for iterative improvement. In the survey, participants were provided with an evacuation scenario at a typical in-person workplace, pre-pandemic. They were asked to fill out the template based on the scenario, and then fill out the survey based on their experience of using it, providing both qualitative and quantitative feedback. This took about 15 to 20 minutes. As mentioned earlier, we used the metrics of relevance, usability, and information accessibility to design our survey questions. First, we asked about the general perceptions of evacuation forms. For example, how strongly do participants agree that they've been frustrated while filling out one of these forms, or that these forms are useful? Participants were also asked to provide specific feedback on each section of the form. So they were presented one section at a time and were asked the same questions across all of them. Examples of these questions include, how easy was it to understand this section? Or is it easy to obtain the information for this section? Finally, we asked about participants' perceptions of the form as a whole. In the next slide, I'm going to go over some results for this particular sort of question, which also demonstrates the type of statements we asked. As promised, here's some sample results on how participants felt about the form overall. This graph refers to test 1. Now let's walk through what the graph means. On the left, we have the questions that we asked participants. Next, note the middle axis here. The blue bars to the right of the axis signify where participants agreed with the statement, while the orange and the red bars to the left signify the percentage of participants that disagreed. Results were generally positive here. For the sake of time, I will only go over the first 2 statements. Let's start with the statement at the top. It reads, "The form was easy to complete." Moving over to the x-axis, you can see at a glance that most participants agreed with the statement because of how much blue there is. This is reversed for the second statement. Most participants disagreed that the form was time-consuming to complete. Even outside of these specific results, most participants agreed on the relevance of our form's content, as well as saying that they typically had access to all the information needed to complete the form. Majority of the changes we made to the form were based on usability. In the first iteration, we had comments that focused on the structure and interpretation of some fields. For example, we had a section titled Organizational Presence that participants found difficult to complete. We restructured the section in response entirely and added extra text for clarification where appropriate. In the second iteration, we had a small number of issues surrounding clarity and accuracy that were identified. Specifically, there were comments on how certain fields could not always be accurately completed. For the final version, we emphasized that these were asking for estimates. All other changes were very minor, with only a few changes to wording and no major restructuring or reorganization. Welcome to the final template. It spans the front and the back of a single page, in addition to another page for comments. You can't see it, but the comment page has no lines on it for writing. It's just a big text box in case someone needs room to draw or needs extra room for whatever reason. I'll briefly go over the sections of our form. First, we have the general information section that queries some basic conditions and building information data. Next, we have room for some organizational information, specifically personnel that may be involved. After this, we queried information about the evacuation. This was a mixture of quantitative and qualitative information, asking more about the evacuation context and performance metrics. On the flip side of the page, we have our longest section, evaluation. Most of these questions are yes or no, with some space for comments with the binary questions. We also used a section to identify if there were any challenges and provide personnel this chance to suggest corrective actions or add more comments. And finally, we have room for signatures of whoever may need to sign off on the report. The final template was adapted by our organization, the National Research Council of Canada, for use in evacuations. We interviewed 3 end users from within the organization and gained some additional and somewhat unexpected insights. First, I'd like to note how the end users did fundamentally feel that standardized forms are necessary. As expressed by P2, I think it's very important that we have a standard form that can be used to track and record everything. Our interviewees felt that the form covered all relevant information comprehensively. Statements like, "I think everything can be addressed," supported this. The interviewees also agreed that the form overall was usable, easy, and quick to complete. For example, P3 said, "I like the new one. It's very precise and it's easy to fill in, has lots of information." Some participants attributed this to the improved layout of the form. P1, for example, expressed that formatting just might make it appear to be a little bit more friendly. While the information we queried, or the form queried, generally seemed accessible, participants pointed out specific concerns about recording accurate evacuation times, especially if the evacuation was unplanned. This observation is supported by a previous study, which shows that reported total evacuation times of drills are often likely to be either estimates or rounded. In addition, we found that the process of standardization itself might yield unexpected insights into organizational practices. For example, P2 identified an open feedback loop. We often submit tickets, but the reporting of whether it's been looked at or not does not always get back to us. It would be nice to have that documented. Another participant noted potential for further standardization. P1 revealed, "In the new one, there's a question, was the evacuation checklist completed? I went through all my notes from security training and confirmed with my building authority, and we couldn't find anything. How did you end up putting it on the form if it isn't something that's standardized from one end of the council to the other? These insights highlight how simply going through the process requires taking a critical look at and reevaluating existing organizational measures. Doing so may shed light on structural or organizational issues, requiring us to recognize and address that had not been identified until starting this process. Given these insights, we consider standardization might be a valuable tool beyond reporting, and our research has highlighted the importance, benefits, and needs for systematic, comprehensive documentation in the field. Thank you so much for your time today. I would also like to thank my colleagues, Martin Amos, Steve Gwynn, and Nuruddin Benishu, and my supervisor, Max, for helping the research get to the point that it's today. And I look forward to chatting about the research. We have a paper under review, which I'm happy to forward along when the process is complete, if anyone is interested. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Khadija, also for your nice presentation. And it's now time for questions. So as mentioned, I ask you for the speakers, please turn on your camera. And for the audience, you can put your questions in the chat and please indicate if the question is for one of the specific speakers or more. We already have a question in the chat, so I'm gonna read it. It's for Yunhe. So the question is, there are obvious advantages of virtual studies. However, the ecological validity is heavily discussed. Were you able to somehow validate your results?
Thank you for the question. I think the question is about ecological validity. When we are talking VR, it's a topic that we need to discuss. Actually, I would say the VR, using VR in evacuation environment have been popular than before, and lots of research have done lots of work to compare the human behavior in VR and in real scenarios, and the previous have done lots of work to show actually people will make similar route choice or decision making in virtual environment. And when it comes to my research, I would say, for example, in the first example, we additionally use the data from another data set to validate our hypothesis. Sometimes it works, but sometimes it's not, because it's not always easy to get a similar data set from another environment. But I would say this method has been supported by previous research on the ecological validated VR, especially in evacuation study. Thank you.
Thanks, Yunhe. This is indeed a very known, debated questions in our field for those of us that work with VR. I have a question for the first speaker, for Hossein, so maybe we can take that first. And I find very interesting the approach. I'm familiar with the work that you have been doing, also because some of my colleagues in Lund have been involved. And I have a question which is more linked, like, I understand this is, let's say, a first attempt to go into this kind of macroscopic understanding of people movement. But what about more complex scenarios? Like, for instance, it's easy to look at step extent in 1D, but already if we go in 2D, or if we think about staircases even in 3D, I mean, it might be more complex to look at this. Have you put some thoughts about this, or is there any, let's say, ideas that you had in how much this work that you have been doing can be extended to more complex scenarios? Hossein.
Yeah, actually, to design the experiments, the first idea was to remove the complexity as much as possible, and the reason for single file scenarios was that. So by removing the complexities like overtaking, like having 2, 3, 4 lines, and like having stairs, we could understand what is the relationship between the step extent and the speed, and how people take the steps when they are in a congested area. But we also had some wider flow scenarios, and by characterizing that, we could understand, okay, they may not be affected from the person directly in front. They may be affected by the person in front of that person when they have some offset with the person in front. And yeah, it can add more complexity, and the model can be different if we add those things. But the first idea was just developing for more simple scenarios and then going ahead and developing for wider flow and other complex situations.
Thanks, Hossein, for your comments. I think it's very reasonable because, I mean, we always have to start from something, and it's better to, let's say, control what can be confounding factors. And I guess the next stage of research would be to try to figure out more complex situations. I cannot see more questions in the chat, so in the meanwhile, I take the opportunity to do a question to the third speaker, to Khadija, but I urged everyone in the audience to write down more questions. I don't want to sound like I'm the only one speaking. So very interesting work. It's something that I completely can agree with, that we need more standardization in everything that is to do with evacuation, not just evacuation drills. But my next question is this, because very often the challenge is not only defining what a standard way of doing things should be, but to make sure the people adopt that standard. So maybe you can think or you can comment about this, because I mean, I know some of the people you work with, and I'm sure they put thinking about this. For instance, myself, I'm involved in ISO, and there is no such standard. So it would be very nice to, let's say, push this kind of idea to have a evacuation drill reporting template. But have you thought about that? So how likely do you think this is going to be adopted? No, because this has the potential to be adopted not just, let's say, in the sphere of the National Research Council of Canada, right? But it could be having a much wider outreach. Have you put some thinking into this or thought about some next steps?
Hi. First of all, thank you for your question. Yes, that is an interesting question. Our goal with this, hopefully, is the intent that the form is easily adaptable. I think that one of the key points of this is that we don't expect the form in its entirety to be adapted everywhere. I think every jurisdiction and organization has its own sort of regulatory and legal requirements. So we've kind of presented the form as a sort of starting point. I think in terms of next steps, digitization is probably a good next step, because I think that we had in some of our interviews, we had some of our officers talk about how they wish that they could seamlessly sort of integrate this with like an online ticket system. So I think the challenge here really is, and something to think about is, getting the word out, so to speak, that, there has been a process that has been done, and we do have this template, and just take a look at it, and you might notice some things that may have fallen through the cracks. And so I think that's the real challenge here, but hopefully once this paper is published, we'll be able to get that out. But yeah, I think I'm not sure, did I answer that question?
I think it's a good starting point. I don't know if any of your co-authors have more thoughts on this, but I would be very keen in trying to push something like this in like one of the standardization organizations like ISO or similar organizations, because this is exactly the type of efforts that we need. I mean, someone that, let's say, raised the questions of inconsistency in what we are doing in a given area means that, yeah, we need to have a standard. But again, the standard will be can be the best standard in this world, but if it's not used, then it's not a standard. So the main mission is indeed to try to push it forward. But this is a very good initial step. So I really appreciate the efforts that you did together with your colleagues. As mentioned, feel free to anyone that wants to make more questions, either in the chat, or you're also free to ask if you want to turn on your mic and ask. Otherwise, I have in the meanwhile another question for Yunhe this time, which is more like it's very interesting to look at your studies, and we saw your VR scenario. It was very good to see it through the the actual scene in this virtual reality game. And one thing I noticed was it's mostly people walking and doing wayfindings, but there is no real threat, right? So like there is no fire or whatever, or the threat, at least visually present. So my question was more like, how do you think this will relate to a crowd evacuation scenario? So not just a wayfinding task. So when you have a threat.
Yeah. Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
So, I mean, in your scenario, we could see that you had people moving around and doing wayfinding tasks, but there was no real threat, right? There was no fire, there was no smoke. Do you think, for instance, the fact of avoiding the crowd will be consistent in a scenario where you have a threat? So maybe you want to stick to the familiar, or you want to stick to other people, or do you think that's something that you can generalize also to scenarios where the threat is directly visible?
Actually, I don't know. I think you mentioned that's like a kind of like a time pressure. When people have different levels of time pressure, their motivation will change, and they may have different route choice. In our environment, we just give the instruction like you have to get out of the building as quickly as possible. We don't mention anything about the threat. That means maybe the threat is not strong and they don't have very strong motivation to do the choice. But I think if we change, increase the threat, they will perform or behave in a different way.
Thanks, Yunhe. I can see in the chat and also in the Q&A some questions. There is one from Arturo for the third speaker, for Khadija. Well done. Have you considered potential response biases such as non-response bias or recall bias, and how to solve or address this in the future?
Yes, hi. So thanks for your question. I just wanted to ask for a clarification. Do you mean in terms of the responses we had for the surveys? Before
I think that's what Arturo means.
That's what they mean? Okay. Yes, so we have considered the biases. So like non-response bias, for example, we omitted survey responses that were incomplete from our analysis, so we didn't include those. Additionally, we had recall bias is a concern because we did these during the pandemic. So we asked them to recall in our scenario. We provided them a scenario with some basic details, and then asked them to, whatever details we omitted, recall a recent evacuation. To that end, we asked them specifically when was the last evacuation you had been in. So addressing the possibility of the people, yes, there is that concern, of course. We are not really, so we sort of had to go on best. We had participants who were experts and participants who were officers. So not everybody had the same sort of responses in terms of when they had last completed an evacuation, for example. Of course, I think to address this concern, we would have to run more surveys with a larger number of participants to sort of validate the results to that extent. So I think conducting another sort of larger scale survey would hopefully sort of shed light on and address those concerns. I hope that answered the questions. Or yeah.
Thanks, Khadija. I think this is a good answer. There is one last two actually more question, but I take one of the two also for Yunhe in the Q&A. So Max Kinate is curious to know about your thoughts about pre-planning a route and habits, how they interact with each other. So for example, the people that commute routinely the same way to work, but then they might deviate from their route based on traffic. So what do you think about habit versus pre-plan? How will this relate to wayfinding?
I think the pre-planning the route is some kind represent their habit. In some cases, in reality, just like they have already take their regular, can be their pre-planned route. And also Max mentioned that the commute to work, like they may divert from their planned route. I think it will become more complex, because if the alternative route will take a shorter time for you to reach the destination, it will be different. It involves utility. So our survey is just an imaginary question, just to make a choice between stick to your planned route or alternative. So I think in some kinds of it's it kind of like a habit pre-planned, but in reality it's more complex. Also, I just want to give a short answer on Max another question about the door weights. Actually, in the third example, we just consider the social influence. So we just focus on the contextual factors about the crowd split, crowd size. So whether the door weights is also important. Yeah, I know it's important, but we only consider social influence. Thank you.
Thanks, Yunhe. I have one last question for Hossein, and then I think we should wrap up because we are already 2 minutes over time. I just want to know if you put some thoughts on how, and I know in the crowd there of audience there is some people that have worked on this. What happens when you have in this model a population that is different than, let's say, adult standard students, like young and healthy students, like if you have a person on a wheelchair or if you have children? Have you put some thoughts on this, on how widely generalizable would be to different type of populations? I know that it's, as you said, you wanted to start from something simpler, but maybe you put some thoughts already on this.
Yeah, as I mentioned, the model is not developed fully, but some thoughts, and I try to develop that for the single file movement of older people using some external data. Actually, we tried to consider the biomechanics of movement and the space that each person occupied. So usually it's based on the ability of taking steps and based on the space occupied at each moment. And for older adults or disabled adults, they can take steps, but maybe the maximum occupied space of them is different with younger adults. And there's some literature on that in not transportation of fire journals, but in biomechanics journals, like Gait and Posture or some different journals related to biomechanics. So is it the answer or?
Yeah, I think it's good that you start reflecting on this and what's the way forward for the model. So I think it's time to wrap up also because we are 4 minutes over time. I just want to take one more time the opportunity to thank the three speakers, Hossein, Yunhe, and Khadija. As mentioned, we are very happy to have had this event with the early career researchers. We will try to arrange another one as well to give the opportunity to more early career researchers to share their work with the human behavior and fire community. With this, I wrap up for today, and I thank everyone as well that followed this webinar and that keep following our webinar series. And as you know, we will post the recordings of this webinar on our YouTube channel that Arthur has kindly shared in the chat. So thanks everyone, and see you at the next webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, great job, everyone. It's really great.